everyone, and welcome to the Surgical Ergonomics podcast, where we will be discussing everything related to surgical and procedural ergonomics, the people, ideas, and technology that will help enhance your physical wellness and career longevity. I am your host, Geeta Lal. I'm an academic endocrine surgeon, speaker, consultant, and surgical ergonomics coach. Having experienced work-related musculoskeletal injury myself, I am committed to increasing awareness of and developing solutions to counteract the impact of poor ergonomics on the professional and personal lives of healthcare workers in procedural areas. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Surgical Ergonomics podcast. I'm really happy today to welcome as our guest Dr. Josh Mezrich. He's a professor at the University of Wisconsin and holds the Mark A. Fisher Chair in Transplantation. His surgical interests include liver transplantation, kidney transplantation, and laparoscopic donor nephrectomy. He is the surgical director of the Living Donor Kidney Program. In addition to all this, he runs a translational science lab investigating the role of the microbiome and serum biomarkers on organ quality in brain-dead donors. He is the inventor and co-founder of the Mezlight, a sterile surgical task light designed to provide high-definition illumination of surgical fields and ease the physical burden on surgeons. Josh has actually published a book, When Death Becomes Life. It was published by HarperCollins in January of 2019 and has sold many, many copies in 12 countries outside the United States. In fact, he has a second book coming, Every Living Creature, How Xenotransplantation Will Change Our Lives, and please be on the lookout for it in the spring of 2026. So hello, and so great to have you on the podcast today, Josh. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
All right. So, we've kind of described your current positions, but I was wondering if you could give our listeners a little bit of background into your life in terms of where you grew up and your training background, and then how you actually became interested in surgical ergonomics or ergonomics in general, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, and then went on from there to go to Princeton University and then ended up in medical school in New York City. I kind of in a way stumbled into medicine. I don't remember really making a strong decision that was what I wanted to do, but my father did go back to medical school when I was in third grade, and that did fascinate me. But when I went to college, I was a Russian language and literature major. I was pretty cerebral. I love to read, which I still do. I found my way in medical school and never would have thought in a million years I'd do surgery. I wasn't someone who worked a lot with my hands. I wasn't someone who did carpentry, or I couldn't draw a straight line with a T-square. I was kind of a mess, to be honest.
Neither can I, just between us. Okay,
yeah, turns out we don't use T-squares in the OR, so it's all good. But I actually witnessed, as a third-year medical student, my first kidney transplant. And I remember when they released the clamps on the kidney and it turned pink and then urine started coming out, and it just blew my mind. I couldn't believe that worked. I was wondering who that donor might be. I wondered how they figured that all out, and I was really sold by transplant and surgery at that point, and I followed that path. I did not really understand what it was like to be a surgeon, both the mental challenges and the physical challenges, and how taxing it is both mentally, emotionally, but also physically as well. But I do remember in my intern year, the first time I put on a headlight, and maybe some of your listeners remember that the very first few times you used it, I was nervous just to be in the OR, and I cranked the headlight on my head as tight as I could, and I didn't really adjust it correctly, and I spent the next few hours with my head angled in a weird way, and I felt like there was blood coming down the back of my head.
Gosh.
And I thought, this is horrible. I hate wearing this. Now, over the next few years, I learned how to use the headlight and, wore it in virtually every case. But I never liked wearing it. I found it so cumbersome. And I thought, why? We're not like pack horses. Why do I have to wear this on my head? Of course, I never complained. Being a resident, you're just used to kind of sucking it up. And we don't think about how we hold our bodies, the table height, how we're bending over. But I always kind of thought there must be a better way to do this.
I see.
So that's where it all started for me. I actually had been thinking about something different with the lighting since 1997. This is a long
Right.
time
So since you
ago.
were a resident, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do anything about it, but it was always in my mind, like, why are we wearing this on our head? Now, like, I will say this, like, nothing ever hurt in my body until I hit 40. Like, I was a runner, I like to work
Yeah.
out, I never stretched, I just always felt fine. And then right around 40, everything started to change. My back, my knees, my neck, and it's just been kind of a steady decline, if you will. I've started to think a lot more about protecting my body, strengthening my body, and trying to understand ergonomics better. And it's been a while since I turned 40, so
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
No, thank you so much for sharing this journey with me and with our listeners, because I think you've just, in this little bit of the introduction, you've actually highlighted so many key points, right? So one of the things that you just mentioned, I did okay till I was about 40, and then, after that, and that's true for many of us, right? If you look at the literature as well, and it supports that people start to experience work-related musculoskeletal symptoms in surgery and procedural areas after about 10 to 15 years in practice. And that's usually for us, it's probably in mid 40s, right? And for you, it was 40. I started to kind of get twinges, but then, the last straw that broke the camel's neck in my case, rather than the
Um,
back, was, at age 45, 46. So we're kind of, following the literature. And you're absolutely right. I mean, you experienced it on, your first day as an intern wearing that headlight. And I had the same experience during residency. I knew that there was a particular spot on my upper back, kind of just medial to my left shoulder blade, that always hurt after I wore our standard surgical headlights. And we'll get into kind of various headlights here shortly. And I
yeah.
used to call it my headlight knot. The advantage was that, of course, when you're younger, you sleep it off or you get some rest and your body heals and recovers. And I think that's what changes as we get older. We've had more repetitive injuries, and then the body's ability to bounce back has changed. And then that brings kind of this manifestation of symptoms. I have to tell our listeners, I was very excited to have you here for multiple reasons, right? So one is obviously your interest in ergonomics. You've been talking about surgical ergonomics long before I was talking about it. In fact, when I started delving into the literature, I did, kind of encounter your name. And I think it was the early days of the Mezlight. You had just kind of presented at meetings and things like
Yeah.
that. And then I thought, well, here's someone who then went ahead and changed a piece of equipment, with a view to improved ergonomics. So he gets it, so I wanted to have both perspectives. So let's kind of jump into, this topic of lights, and let's start from the basics. We know that our standard surgical lights, which is, a band, a headband and a bulb and a wire and a connector to the power outlet, we know that these lights are independently associated with time spent in sort of high risk neck and back postures. This is published in the literature. There's objective data to show that using posture recording devices. So, what are the various types of lights available to surgeons these days, and what are some of their pros and cons?
Yeah. I mean, a great topic, of course. So every OR has an overhead light, and we're not in any way trying to replace that. But as people know, the overhead lights are very bright. They sit high up. They're kind of hard to move around. They're difficult to adjust as are for deeper patients, which I know we're all used to operating on. The other challenge is that our heads are often in front of them. So I think for a case that you're doing that's on the surface, sometimes the overhead lights are adequate. But I think anything that's deeper, anything that you kind of have to lean in and look at or use loops for, most people are going to find the overhead lights are not enough. The next thing that we're all used to are headlights. And there are lots of different versions of headlights. You kind of referred to the ones so many of us are used to, that are attached by cables, fiber optic cables, to like a power source. And they kind of go on like a headband. And those can be quite bright. They often are somewhat heavy, and you're on a leash. That's actually those are what I've used the most of, and being on that leash is actually quite horrible. I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you forgot you had it on and walked and almost pithed yourself.
Whiplash. Yes. Yes.
It's actually quite horrible. Now there are many more lighter headlights. There are a lot of companies have moved towards battery powered
Hmm.
headlights. Then on top of that, there are lights that hook onto your loops.
Hmm.
Now, I do appreciate that the newer lights have gotten lighter, which I think is an improvement. But what I maintain, the challenge with the headlights, in addition to the weight, is that they force you to like look in a very specific direction for long periods of time. And nowadays, I have my fellows wear the headlights, and they either have to be looking where I'm looking, or I'm not getting the field lit up. And I think when you're the one wearing the headlight, you're kind of lighting up the field for everyone. And so even if the headlight is lighter, it still forces you to hold long-term positions that are very stressful to your body, to your neck, and actually to your mind. I can't tell you like how freeing it is to not have anything on your head and yet still have the kind of brightness that you need. Because I hate operating in the dark. It makes me so frustrated when you go into a deep field and you can't really see. So I need the light, but I really don't want to have it on my head. And now the other kind of set of lighting options are the in-cavity lighting. So some of those are hooked onto retractors,
Hmm.
some retractor blades that people use for various surgeries, pelvic surgery in particular. And there's some devices for breast surgery that go into the wound. And I think there are some specific surgeries where those can work well for. I think for a lot of cases, like a big abdominal case, the retractors tend to get blocked by the tissue. Or, this is the other thing, like as a surgeon, one of the most important things is that I get my retractors set right, and I'm like really obsessive about my retractors, and I never want anyone messing with my retractor. So I really didn't want to have a light that was hooked onto a retractor, because
I
I
see.
feel like the retractor is like the surgeon's kind of special tools, and I didn't want to mess with that. I've tried a bunch of the different retractor lights, and they're either not bright enough or they can't get to where I want them to go.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for kind of, I'm going to use this and it's going to sound funny, illuminating the topic of, I should say, lights available to us in our work in the OR. And, again, thank you for highlighting a couple of things. Exposure is king, right?
Mhm.
Where you put your retractors, how you gain exposure to your field and set it up can make or break your OR case and the entire day, in fact, right? So
Right.
you mentioned operating deep in the abdomen. Obviously, if you're working in the liver or the pancreas or the pelvis, these are all deep spaces. So urologists, gynecologists, and transplant surgeons, everyone will sympathize with that deep hole. My deep hole is the neck.
Yes.
And we've kind of, I think we've done the same thing. I passed the pain on to the residents because I'd had an injury in residency and I had
Mhm.
another injury in fellowship. So by the time I became an attending, I refused to wear the headlight. And I realized I've passed the pain on to someone else. And you're absolutely right. I mean, they then have to, assume not only the weight of the headlight and the features associated, with the headlights poor ergonomics, but also direct the light where I want them to, which may not be a natural position for them, as you
Right.
correctly pointed out. And then there have been other workarounds. I've tried lighted retractors because the neck is not as deep as the abdomen.
Mhm.
And so the lighted retractors work well if you don't want to use, any sort of headlight. Some of the residents got their new loops. I still had my old loops then when I was at the worst of my pain. So they had the new loops with the smaller
Yeah.
headlights, which was wonderful for the ergonomics. The weight, as you said, was much lower, but they weren't as bright, right? And
Yes.
they didn't illuminate the field. So it sounds like you then identified really, a gap in all these available options. There are clearly multiple options, and none of them seemed, 100% of what you were looking for. And so take me back to the time you were thinking about the Mezlight prototype, and what did your light absolutely have to do? Like, what were your non-negotiables as you went on this journey?
Yeah, that's great. So, and it's been a long journey, much
Oh,
longer than I
absolutely.
expected. So, I mean, the number one thing, of course, was that it couldn't be on my head. So that was, a light that couldn't be on my head. I initially thought I wanted it to be at least as bright as a headlight. That was like my initial thought, because I thought, well, the headlight, a really bright headlight, maybe can be bright enough. I just don't want it on my head. I kind of learned over time that in fact I wanted it much brighter, and we can talk about that.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be sterile, and I wanted it to be fully autoclavable, because we had kind of investigated using various disposables. But in terms of cost and waste, I didn't really want to go that route. So we wanted to design a light that would be fully autoclavable, which is, not the easiest thing with all the electronics that are required. And I wanted it to be easy to move. The surgeon who's operating can move it, and then it can hold its position. So those were all of my thoughts. Now, initially, I wasn't quite sure how I would be able to do this and not have the light be in the way. But at the University of Wisconsin, and I came here for my fellowship in 2005, I still use these kind of older retractors, some people might know, called the Martin arms. So they hook onto the side rail. They're separate posts. And they're posts that are straight and then have a bend. And the bend takes them across to the midline of the patient. And then the retractor itself can move from there. And looking at the Martin arm, it occurred to me that if I could have a light that attached to something like that, where it comes off the midline, then it wouldn't get in my way as I rotated around. So when I put those things together, that's when it kind of gelled for me that we could make a sterile light that hooks off a post, kind of like the Martin arm, that will be on our field and shouldn't be close to our head, shouldn't be close to our arms. We can pull it in as we need it, pull it out as we need it. So I always was joking with my team, it's not even a light, it's a surgical instrument. It's truly like a well-designed instrument that you use as a surgeon, to make your life better.
Well, thank you for outlining that. And as you were describing these non-negotiables, as I called them, I was just thinking, I said, oh my gosh, you just highlighted another thing, that most of our OR kind of overhead lights are often shining on us or warming up our neck. And it's so hard to get them kind of where you want them. But the American College of Surgeons has kind of these ergonomic recommendations from their task force. And one of the first items in there is how to position the headlight, how to position the OR lights. And they actually say, they should be in the midline, not, and put one right over the incision, and put one either coming from below or above, but in the midline. So it's interesting to hear how you kind of also arrived as you were, trying to design this light, that it had to kind of be in the middle, because that's like an important ergonomic principle. And then you mentioned kind of the brightness, right? What are the standard, I believe it's called lumens, right? What they measure, or brightness in. So what is a standard OR headlight, lumens quantity, and what was that minimum number that works well for most surgeons?
Yeah, I mean, this is a whole topic that we spent, like, I would say years thinking about and working on. And I also, one of the very interesting things, if we get into it and trying to start a company, is trying to learn how to communicate with engineers, which is quite interesting, because I always just said, I want the light to be as bright as it can possibly be and not too hot. But like, you can't say that to an engineer, because they're always like, well, we can always make it brighter, so it's a confusing situation. But I just wanted to get to this. I originally thought, well, a regular headlight should be bright enough. But what we learned with the kind of first set of trials is that, like, a headlight, you say you line it up with your loops and you're looking directly at the light and it's reflecting back into your eyes. Whereas the Mezlight, comes from the side and it doesn't necessarily reflect directly back into your eyes. And we actually ultimately wanted it significantly brighter than actually any headlight that I had ever used before. Another point, though, is that it is amazing how much light washes out inside a cavity. And you can be sitting in your office and I can shine the Mezlight on my desk and it looks so ridiculously bright, like you almost have to wear sunglasses. But then you go into an operating room where you have the overhead lights and you have a cavity, and the light will wash out significantly. And like, you'll often see headlights that are about 100,000 lux. The thing that's misleading is all of it depends on how far is the light from the cavity and how big is your circle that it's illuminating. So most people will realize that, well, their headlight has an adjustable
Mhm.
aperture, right, to see how big their circle is. And
Right.
most headlights, although you can make it bigger, at least when I was using the headlight, I would always make it the smallest aperture because it made it the brightest.
Brightest. Mhm.
And then it depend the lux really depended on how far you kept your head from the wound and how small your aperture was. So if a headlight runs from, I don't know, 100 to 150,000, maybe some high-end ones can be more than that, but it usually at something like 12 inches, 14 inches from
Mhm,
the
mhm,
field.
mhm.
We wanted a couple of different things. We wanted it on the high end of that, but I also really wanted a bigger circle,
Yeah.
because I want, I guess if you're looking straight through loops and you just illuminate the size of your loops, that might be okay as long as everyone's looking exactly at that spot.
Right.
But I
Right.
never found that adequate. And so what we kind of challenged our engineers to do in multiple iterations is
Hmm.
to do almost a 5 centimeter in diameter circle that it would illuminate, and we got it up to 150,000 lux
Hmm.
at about 12 inches or so. It is brighter than, I mean, when you see people that are using the headlights that are attached to their loops, they may
Yeah.
look bright when they're in their office, but in a cavity, they really can't
Yeah.
illuminate adequately. Whereas this can be quite bright.
And we know that if there's blood in any sort of cavity, then the brightness, the net brightness is still lower, right? Because blood will then again
Correct. That's
dissipate.
totally true. One of the advantages of the Mezlight is you can move it in and out without bending your head in and
And
out.
back and forth.
So
Yeah.
I like, say you're working in a deep cavity and then there's some bleeding and you can't tell where. You can just pull it down almost like a flashlight and look around. It'll be really bright if you pull it in, then you can pull it right back up. So I find I'll make the incision. I don't really need it too much for the skin incision. Once I get in
Right.
the cavity and place my retractors, I'll pull it down into place. But then as I get set and I'm maybe dissecting out a blood vessel, I'll pull it down even closer. It'll light up the whole blood vessel. Then you might pull it back. So you're able to constantly move it and change it. The headlight, you can't really do that.
Yeah, you've got to
Actually, on
ask.
the early Mezlight version, we had an aperture uh,
Mm,
on there, but we ultimately realized that everyone wants it as big as they can make it, and you can actually control the brightness by moving the light up and down. So we
mm.
actually got rid of the aperture to make it less complex and easier to autoclave.
So that's good to know. Okay.
Yeah.
So, it says bright, sounds like in the initial trials, the surgeons wanted it like you as bright
Yeah.
as it could be.
I mean, I will tell you in trial one, I mean, these, if people want to get into development, it's incredibly fun. It's
Yep, I
incredibly
was going to ask you
scary.
about
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
But like it's fun, scary, exciting, and an
Yeah.
incredible learning experience. All the things I enjoy at times. Definitely our first version that we got in the OR failed because it, even though it was as bright as most headlights on the market, it just wasn't bright enough to
Mm,
make me think. It wasn't as bright as I thought we needed it to make it a really great product. And so
got
we
it.
ultimately had to like pull back and redesign. So
Okay. So there's now, I was going to ask you a question for those of our listeners and audience who have like this potential inventor bug, I should say, or,
yeah,
as they're working, they think about these things. And you highlighted a couple of things from your journey. So this one realizing, first iteration, it wasn't quite what you were hoping it would be. And so you take it back to the drawing board. Another challenge you highlighted was, communicating surgeon speak to
yeah.
design engineers, right? Biomedical and other engineers. What other, I should say, pearls of wisdom and or challenges did you encounter? Because that's what leads to pearls of wisdom. Did you encounter during this journey? And I guess I would follow that up by saying, would you be open if, one of our listeners wanted to reach out to you since they're starting their inventor
Yeah.
journey?
So the answer to that is definitely yes.
Yes.
I'm always
Okay.
happy to do that. And yeah, we have a great community of people. And, I will tell it really is a journey. And I think a lot of us in
Mhm.
medicine, we learn this kind of learned helplessness, if you will. We work in a highly imperfect system and we get really good at getting things done in that system. But it's hard to think, oh, I can make a big change to the
Yeah.
system, depending on what it is we're talking about.
Mhm.
When I initially had the idea and it stayed with me and I thought more about it and I got, through my training and I was an attending and had a few other things in place. I started talking to colleagues about it, floating the idea around, seeing what people thought. I actually talked to some reps who I had, formed
Mhm.
relationships with in my practice, and then some people in the industry signing an NDA and talking about the
Mhm.
idea, and kind of exploring, is this possible? What are the barriers? Why doesn't this exist already? Because it seemed to
Right,
me like
right.
kind of
Yeah.
obvious. I had this interesting discussion with someone at a major lighting company, and they had
Mhm.
done a focus group with surgeons, and the surgeons had somehow they came away with the idea that it would be okay to attach things on retractors, but not on the side rail. And I totally disagree with that as a surgeon. We have plenty of space on the side rail, but I dislike attaching things to the retractor. So that was when I thought, maybe they don't know. I will say that I probably wouldn't have pushed ahead with it, but I happened to be at a neighbor's house just on an evening hanging out, and my neighbors were kind of successful entrepreneurs,
I
and
see.
they just socially were asking me, "Hey, what kinds of things are you working on?" And I was like, "Let me tell you about this idea." And it is the kind of idea that's simple, that is easy to pitch. It's the elevator pitch almost writes itself. When you hear it, you're like, yeah, that seems obvious. Why doesn't that exist already? And
Right.
they immediately were like, we should do this. And
See.
that I was initially like, what? We can't do this. But so we actually started to forge ahead. We took on a few students from our engineering school here in Wisconsin, and actually we started working with a team of engineers in Chicago that I
Mm,
knew from a previous project.
I
And
see.
I would like drive down there, and I'd be standing in a conference room, and they'd all be drawing or making mock-ups as I was talking, learning to kind of communicate. And we started making mock-ups and discussing the challenges. I can just tell you that at every turn, there was something new I had to learn about,
Hmm.
from, design to power to disposable versus reusable. Can it be autoclaved? Then the other, how are we going to pay for this? Raising money, bootstrapping, going to
Right. Yeah.
angel firms to FDA regulation,
Hmm.
patenting. Every piece of it is an incredible learning experience. I couldn't have done it without my partners who've been like, it's funny, we're sort of somewhat risk averse in medicine, particularly when it comes to like money, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're always used to trying to calculate heavily the risk for our patients, and we try to take really
Right.
careful risks. As kind of entrepreneurs and investors, they're a lot more comfortable with that type of risk. And so having them as partners has really, it would never have happened without them. So I give them much credit. But
Hmm.
honestly, it's a really fun ride. And I think you have to listen to criticism and feedback, and you have to sort it out, not take it personally, and decide, is this something I can fix? Is this something I don't agree with? Or are they right and should I stop? I think if you really believe in it, and you're getting feedback that it's working for some people, you can keep going. But there are lots of barriers. There are
Yeah.
lots of barriers that can make you want
Yeah.
to stop.
Sounds like it, but you made an excellent point, which is that, where there's a will, there's a way. And if you keep an open mind, as surgeons, we're often used to being the experts in the room,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
here, even I think you have an advantage as a surgeon inventor if maybe you had some background in engineering and maybe business, which none of us really learned
Right.
in surgical training. But it's not impossible, right? So you can find collaborators and expertise in areas that you're not an expert in, and build a team and complement each other's strengths. And that's what surgeons do well.
Yeah.
So I think it does play to surgeons' strengths to do this. And who better to drive the change and invention and modification of existing technology than the end users, right? I mean, we keep talking about this in the Society of Surgical Ergonomics as well. We have to provide our feedback and our opinion to industry, otherwise our instrumentation will not change.
Yes.
Their focus is likely, can this be meet FDA requirements, and can it do the job? And then beyond that, it depends on where the developmental stage is, etc. So, I really appreciate you sharing this. And I think
Yeah.
for people who are interested in this avenue, knowing that you don't have to have bunch of extra letters, MBAs and engineering degrees to do this is very helpful. You mentioned something that got me thinking. So you said you want, this light had to be associated with the retractor. I'm sure there are listeners who will ask, well, I don't use a retractor for my surgery. For example, I use like a handheld lateral retractor. I don't have a post retractor. The only time I use a baby Thompson is when we're short medical students. And so I set up my thyroidectomy that way. So if you're not using a retractor, can you still use the Mezlight? And where would you kind of, put it on if you don't have that post?
Yeah, let me just clarify. So actually, you don't need a retractor for the Mezlight.
Okay.
So
I may have misunderstood. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I wanted to make sure I had a device that did not need to attach to a retractor, because my goal is like to make you operate better and happier, but not change how you operate. And so I really didn't want to mess with anyone's retractor, and whatever your setup is, it's possible the Mezlight can work for you. Now, it is funny, like the idea is incredibly simple, and I had been thinking about it for many years. And yet when I first use it in the OR, I realized there still is a learning curve, even for me, in thinking about where to position it, depending on how you use your body, where your incision is, where the table is. The Mezlight is a few components. So it comes with a Mez post. My name is Mezrich, so that's where Mez came from. But there's the Mez post, which is kind of, so that's the part that's based on the Martin arm. So you don't actually need a Martin arm. It's the post itself. And in fact, the wiring, the electronics goes through that post. And then the Mezlight snaps onto the post, and then the power cord plugs into the back of it. And the post and the light and the arm are totally sterile and autoclavable in the standard system. Now, positioning is like really important. So, you have the option of, when you're standing facing the table, of positioning the light below you or above you. And one thing I learned is that you don't want the post too close to the incision, because you don't want the light to curve over in front of your head, because like then when you lean in, your head can hit it. So what I've learned is like I actually position it a little bit away, and we have lots of pictures on our website, and
Right. I've seen them. So
and
I
so
will,
you can, so you can bring the light in like low, and so that your head is nowhere near it, and it lights up the field, but it doesn't actually block your eyes because you're focusing on the tissue.
Right. I will include the link to your website in the show, so that then people can kind of look at, how to set things up. And I'm sure that, there is support from the company to help surgeons.
We can support. We're shooting various videos, kind of tutorials, if you will, but also we're very open to teaching people. And if people want to trial it, we'll come out and help them with that. But the setup is really important. You can't just throw it on however you want, and then you'll lean in and contaminate it. It's really important. So like, I don't know, for neck cases, if there's room on the headboard above, sometimes positioning it on the headboard actually angled away and the light coming in has worked well. Other people have put it below them or across from them. It depends like exactly how your positioning is. Yeah.
I really like one of the advantages that you mentioned. It's surgeon controlled, right? Because with our headlights, sometimes we have to ask other people to bring things down and bring things up and tighten it or loosen it and things like that. And similarly, we keep asking, why do I have to ask someone from the anesthesia team to adjust the bed up and down? Why doesn't the bed come with a surgeon control?
I know.
So that we can do what we want, right? Things that seem intuitive to us. So listeners, there is a project out there for anyone who wants to design a surgical OR table or procedural table with the controls.
Yes.
That are within the purview of the surgeon and not the anesthesia team. I think the anesthesiologist will be grateful for that as well.
By the way, I was just funny. I was doing a laparoscopic donor nephrectomy, and I had the rep in we got new cameras, and I was, they're moving towards a better system that can be more voice activated, like a Siri type system. And my hope is that we can also control our music, so that I can go to the next song or change the music by my voice and move the table, all those things. And they seem to think that was all coming, but
I'm not surprised. I mean, who knows, right? Like 10 years ago, would we have thought that we would have, these things that we have now, and AI would be where it is? So Yeah, who knows? Technology certainly is, the beauty of it is it keeps changing and it keeps enhancing the way we do our jobs.
Yes.
I wanted to touch on another topic that I know you've talked about as well as written about in your blog, which is also pertains to ergonomics, which is the topic of microbreaks, right?
Mm.
Now, as a transplant surgeon, you're ticking all the boxes for ergonomic challenges in the OR. You have long cases, working in deep cavities, awkward positions, and with these adjuncts, as we've talked about, loops, headlamps. So what do you chat with your transplant trainees and residents about, and when you're giving kind of, topics or giving talks about OR ergonomics for transplant surgeons? So what, I guess, nuggets of information should they know?
Yeah. I mean, I wish, well, people like you, thankfully, are talking about this more. I wish we spent more time talking to people as med students, as interns, throughout their whole training about positioning, taking care of their bodies, taking care of their minds, because we don't do enough of that. And I think, first of all, I've switched to Hokas, by the way. I think wearing comfortable shoes is key. Making sure you get comfortable adjusting the table to the appropriate height, making sure your loops are well fitted. I, for years, wore heavy, kind of poorly adjusted loops. I think trying to avoid the headlight is something I'm working for. I want us all to be able to do. I do so much poor positioning myself, where I lean in terrible positions, where I'm sewing, and I think really, I think it would be great if we had physical therapists or ergonomics experts to come into the OR early in our training and work with us on this. And I know there are people who do that. I've become a huge, you really got to take care of your body. And I think, honestly, weight training, yoga, these things are critically important. I found it out later in life when I had some really bad back problems, kind of in my mid to upper 40s. And it is so critical. I now have a yoga mat in my office. I like the Peloton, and I do a lot of their weight training or their, other workouts, either in my office between cases or at home. Even if it's for 10, 15 minutes, it can help a lot. I think a lot of it is also the mental piece of it. I tell my fellows all the time that so much about being able to do a complex operation is being able to stay calm and relaxed, and when things aren't going right, being able to take a deep breath and not, kind of lose your cool. You mentioned the micro breaks. I do liver transplants, and sometimes they can be very long, and I do think being able to just take a few minutes, whether it's after you've reperfused and you pack the patient, whether it's during the dissection and you're just going to take a short break to kind of clear your mind. It can be so worth it. I think the mental, the physical, it's so much on our shoulders, and really working with your team, being comfortable calling partners when you need it, thinking through the case, developing in your mind a plan, and if it's not sticking to your plan, stepping back and saying, what am I not doing right here? I wish I was a better sleeper. Sleep is a huge part of all this, but I'm definitely not someone who's very good at sleeping. Yeah, I think it's a very, very mentally and physically taxing to do any operation. I mean, the amount of decisions we make, the amount of questions we get, it's intense. And I think protecting your body, protecting your mind are so key.
Yeah.
I can tell you, I don't want to sound like I'm selling something here, but like having comfortable scrubs, having comfortable gowns, not having stuff all over your head, being able to move around freely, it actually is incredibly freeing. I always have gotten so frustrated if I can't see well, if things aren't light enough, I can't get the lights. I mean, I remember pulling these lights around and almost hitting people in the head because I'm trying to
Yeah.
get them down in there. So these are things I think we can change.
Control, right? And
Yeah,
change.
yeah,
Yeah, you've, highlighted all the important pieces and yet again, and I want to remind our listeners that, I hope you're getting a theme, but I think in every episode you hear the same things, right?
yeah,
That these are the things that we can control, and however you can incorporate these breaks, they're important for both your physical well-being and your mental well-being, because cognitive ergonomics is a whole other area that we don't address enough, and that I'm hoping I'll be able to do an episode on that. But those breaks address both pieces, the mental strain as well as the physical strain. And then, like you, I'm a late arrival to the physical fitness era and importance that has to maintain a surgical career. And we encourage people to look at the American College of Surgeons ergonomics recommendations, as well as the resources on the Society of Surgical Ergonomics. You can also read about Dr. Mezrich's blogs on this topic, micro breaks. So there's no excuse for really, 10, 15 minutes is all it takes, and it pays so many dividends, right? So not to belabor the point anymore, but I think there is a theme, and they're hearing this from different specialists in different episodes. So I'm hoping that, this becomes, as you said, routine. We shouldn't even think about, these things that are so.
I mean, I used to be a runner, and I would go out for long runs, and it was good for my brain more than anything. But over time, like, it pounds on your knees and your back. And what I realize as you age, you no longer should work out to like look good. You need to work out to feel good, and short workouts, strengthening your muscles, strengthening your core. I know it's
maintaining function. That's the goal, maintaining function.
And it really does work. Like it really does work. So
all right.
I was telling, protect your back. You got to protect your back.
You got to protect. Yeah, you got to protect. Now, I'm always amazed at how quickly time passes when we're, recording these episodes, because, I'm with kindred spirits, and we're, we can keep talking for hours, but we have only a few minutes left. And I do want to address something that I remember seeing in your bio or on your website. You've done comedy shows.
That's true.
Okay. And you've got to tell us a little bit more about this. And also, do you have any routines that incorporate the Mezlight in them?
I mean,
or not yet.
No, I love comedy. I think it's the highest form of intelligence. Comedy is clearly my coping mechanism for all situations, for stress, for staying positive. I try to be a very positive person. And I think uplifting your team with humor and comedy will make them work better in general. Obviously, there's a place for it. I don't make jokes if something's going really badly. But when I lived in New York, I did a bunch of open mics, and really enjoy that. I love humor. I love pushing myself to see if I can do it. A lot of comedy is about taking risks. And I like to joke that I didn't have enough courage to become a comedian as my career, but essentially that's why I went into surgery, because my OR is like the world's greatest comedy club, because people tend to laugh at your jokes when you're the surgeon in the room. So
surgeon. All right. Well said.
But no, of course I incorporate the light, and really everything else about myself. I love comedy. I think I grew up watching MASH, which maybe is the reason I ended up in surgery, but then I loved, Scrubs. I loved Seinfeld. I've always loved comedy and comedians, and it is my coping mechanism for sure, for dealing with stress and tough times. Yeah,
I did not grow up in North America, but I discovered MASH as a surgical resident, believe it or not, on reruns, and it holds a special place in my heart. So
I've always wanted to be.
I know what you mean.
I mean, I mean, it's intense what we do. I think really wonderful people go into our field. I think it's amazing what we try to do for people, and I try to stay positive. I always try. I mean, I don't know. Maybe some of it is the you try to look at the bright side even when things are not going well, and maybe some of it's gallows humor, if you will. But
but it's important, because it also, again, breaks up the intensity and gets people on the same page, and that's really what we're looking for, right? Like you said, you try to find a glimmer of hope somewhere in an otherwise very kind of intense work day.
Yes.
Thank you very much again for being here today, and not only sharing your expertise when it comes to kind of ergonomics and lights and things like that, but also sharing your joie de vivre, because it's obvious that you love what you do and enjoy all the various aspects of your life, whether it's operating, taking care of patients, being an inventor. or a stand-up comedian. So I'm really grateful that you spent some time with us this afternoon. So thank you.
I appreciate a chance to share it. I don't get to talk about it enough with, in these venues. And I just remind people, like, it is incredible what we do, and people really want to know about it. And like, I don't know if you have ideas. I think a lot of business people, they're used to people coming in with ideas, but they're not true experts. And like surgeons, we come in with a certain level of expertise that really blows people away. And so, don't just discount your ideas. It doesn't mean every idea you have is going to make it. But if it's something that really affects you, it's worth exploring more.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Please remember to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on social media, Instagram, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We love feedback, so please reach out to us for topics, ideas, speakers, or if you ever want to be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.